Hi there, everybody. My name is Sipho Ngwenya, and welcome to another episode of MultiTalks, where we bring you, the viewer, closer to some of the initiatives being driven by the MultiChoice Group. Now, I'm sure you've seen all the buzz about Shaka iLembe Season 2, which is starting on June 15. Today, I'm joined by someone who has invested a lot of her time into the development of the South African television industry. She also happens to be the executive producer on Shaka iLembe. Please welcome Desiree Markgraaff. Welcome to MultiTalks. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while now. Because the guys mentioned, we're gonna be talking about, Shaka iLembe, etc., etc. So I was thinking to myself, so who are we gonna be talking to? And when they mentioned your name, I was like, okay, this is gonna be a good one. But before we get into it, let's just go, reverse the clock a bit and just talk about your upbringing, where you come from and how you found yourself in this crazy entertainment business of ours.
Wow. Okay. I am the child of two opera singers. My mother was a Swedish opera singer and my father South African, and they met on the stage together. And so I guess I have evolved out of a very creative home. I think that I grew up in Johannesburg. I went to Jeppe Prep. I was a little Joburg girl in a city that was very different to the city that we live in today. And I think that one of the big influences in my growing up was, obviously, I grew up in the apartheid era South Africa. And I think that there was a big awakening for me, as I got into my late teens about the country that I was living in. And so I think that my upbringing, my mother was quite political, really set me up in a way for being a storyteller and being involved in questioning the world that we live in, the society that we have, and most specifically, what kind of society we want to live in. And that was a conversation that was regular in my household, even as a young child, as my mother would question, what was happening in South Africa.
Now, I guess you're quite fortunate in the sense that you actually came from a house where both your folks were in the entertainment industry, right? But at the time when you were growing up, did you not fear for your existence, in the sense that now you're questioning a government and some of the political, I guess, challenges that we're facing at the time? Didn't you find that it would be too much of a risk for you to follow and continue in this path?
I think that no, I never felt that way, and I think I sort of I grew up at a point where it sort of overlapped between what was happening in the country and the change that was already happening. So it was an exciting time to be part of change. And I think that, the kind of conversations that I'd had growing up had prepared me for going into a world where one was not afraid to question what was the situation around. And you must remember that at that time, there was no TV in South Africa. Correct, yes. I think television started, I think, in 1974, 1975. So pre that, there was no television. So you gathered your information and you had to work out what was going on by other means, even newspapers. It was, and the nationalist government had control over the newspapers. So what you read was what they wanted you to read. You could only really learn from conversations and meeting people and absorbing the world around you. And I think that ability to absorb the world around me and to be interested in what was happening, as opposed to what I was reading and then later on what you were getting on from television, has kind of stayed with me all my life. I'm interested in what people tell me and what I'm seeing and discovering, as opposed to always what I'm reading or absorbing from the media.
And you have a very strong legacy in terms of, producing content and some of the stories that you've told. But off the screen, some of your works are also in some of our museums, etc. Tell us about, those pieces and the importance of those being documented and put up in spaces like that.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I think that I've lived in the most exciting time in South Africa, because to have seen this incredible change and just to have been able to document this change and to have been able to be part of something great happening in a country. And so in a way, that's kind of infused every piece of work that we've done. And the Apartheid Museum, which we did, I think, 70 installations for the Apartheid Museum, was a really fantastic project to work on. It came about by very strange origins, because actually there'd been all these licenses being given out for casinos. And
they go from casinos.
Okay. So to get a license for the casino, you had to say what you were going to do. That was a positive for society or whatever. Anyway, the people who got the license for Gold Reef City had built this building for a museum. And originally it was going to be a museum that celebrated the different cultures in South Africa. But somewhere along the line, the financiers had seen the Holocaust Museum and they decided, let's do an Apartheid Museum. And we were contacted because we had done so much documentary work, and my partner Angus Gibson had done a huge amount of documentary work over the years. And we were contacted to help put together the narrative for that. And it was really fantastic to work on. The first thing was just being able to document the journey of South Africa from 1948 until, the end of apartheid. Just documenting that and how it had fundamentally changed the society that we lived in over this period. That was just an incredible honor to go into that research. And just saying that, like, research is such a fascinating thing, because you think you know stuff. And then as you start to research things and you find footage and you find articles. And so, it felt like a really, from a strange beginning, a strange origin around these licenses, to this really, I think, important museum that I know anybody who comes visiting here, or school kids when they do this trip. And, now we live in a free country, and it's hard to imagine born frees don't even know about apartheid.
Correct.
But when you go there and you suddenly realize, wow, this is what my parents and my grandparents went through. It really gives you context to just being grateful and celebrating the democracy that we have today.
And I've been there, I must say. I mean, it is. I mean, even as someone who has seen, what the impact of apartheid has been on our future, right?
Yeah.
Just going there, and it's really it's moving. I don't want to use the word traumatic, but it's very moving, right? It does make you question a lot. So I'm glad. I mean, I think I need to go back there again just to look at the stuff.
Yeah, and especially now when you see what's going on in the world, you just need to remind yourself, how easily things can go wrong, and how hard it is to come out of that, and the huge journey that we've had as a country coming out of that.
So now, Mam Des, you and your team at BOM have produced some great works. I mean, going years back to Yizos to, I just think Namzansi stuff is Maya, I think Ayeye. But there's one body of work which we're going to talk about today, and its importance, in the context of the whole South African, television industry. And it's a beautiful story, right? Shaka. We talk about season 1, and just from a storyline point of view, how did this project come about? And secondly, the storyline itself, how true is it of what people actually know about the story of Shaka?
Yeah. I'm a parent, and I remember, must have been about 14 years ago, I was in Nigeria, and I was doing some research, and I was with a group of women, and we were all a little bit shocked about what our children were watching on TV, that there's no African content for kids on TV. Our kids were all watching Ben 10 and Hannah Montana and whatever. And we were really feeling sad that there was nothing, where are the heroes? Where are heroes on our own continent? Even if you look at movies, we've got all these great heroes and stories about. And so that was the seed of the idea. And on the flight back from Nigeria, I was sitting on the plane talking to my colleague, and I said, I really want for us to start researching, to do a series about when we were kings, because this continent has got so many incredible stories, and there's so many incredible leaders. And pre-colonialism, there was a huge world that nobody's ever explored. It kind of just got sealed with colonialism. And so that was the impulse for it. And then, so we started putting together some ideas. And one of the first places we came to with the idea was to Mzansi Magic. And it's at the time then we were doing Isibaya. And somehow the conversation then got into, okay, well, where would we start? Because doing period stuff is very expensive.
Correct.
And it requires a lot of research, and everything has to be created from scratch. And where would we start? And of course, there was just the logical place to start was, let's start with one of the kings that all of us celebrate. He's the most known. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go in the world, people know the word Zulu. They've heard of Shaka Zulu. And let's start there, because if we can create interest in around African history and around our own heroes and heroines, through this, we'll be able to open the doors for telling many other stories. So that's how it started. And then, it took us a long time to be able to raise the money. And we had a lot of false starts. I think from the beginning till when we actually got the green light eventually was close to 8 years.
Sure.
And we were extremely grateful, I have to say, to Mnet, to Mzansi Magic, for having given the green light, because together we went in partnership trying to raise money because of the scale of the show. Anyway, then came this fantastic period of research. And our research period, because we had spent so long trying to raise money, we were researching all the time, meeting historians and descendants of families and oral custodians, because so much, like history, how many of you read history books? We don't. Like, you'll read the first few pages, then we nod off because it's dry content. But when you start to speak to oral custodians of history, there's so much life and energy. In fact, last night I was on the phone. I had a Zoom with a historian because we're busy looking at the Mpondo history at the moment. And when you're talking to a historian, it's so exciting. I mean, they're telling you so many anecdotes about what happened. And so that was the beginning of Shaka. We started that process. And so we researched for almost 6 years. And because we were trying to raise money, and then things went south, and, then COVID came. And so the battle to get it off the ground was long. But by the time, it was a blessing, because by the time we were ready to go, we'd really done a lot of research, and we'd made so many incredible contacts with people. And it was clear for us what we wanted to do was we wanted to tell the story. Most of African history that you see is being written by academics, and it is from a lens looking in. It is never from the African perspective looking out. So it's always the other telling our story. It's the British telling the story, or, whoever. And so it was really important for us, one, that it is from the African lens out. And by that I mean that, we started pre-colonial. There was no colonials, no white people in the world at the time. So our story is told from this perspective of the characters living in that world. And of course, nobody knows. We know little bits of history, and some of it is fable, some of it is legend. So you try and piece it together. So you're listening to different historians and different takes on something. Then you're going to the Isibongo, you're going to the Amahubu, you're listening to what was being sung about, and how do you correlate that with the history. and slowly trying to surface who these people were. And then you've got to put character into them. So if in, say, Nandi's praises, they talk about her being very, masculine and her with the legs do not meet, what does that mean? That means that she walked in a very powerful way, like a man, perhaps, So you start to think about, okay, what was her character? What kind of personality was she? So that, that research was really fantastic to do. And we used that to develop the series. And then, of course, we had to put, it's like hundreds of years of story that you're trying to truncate, because we went before Shaka's birth, obviously. And we did that because we wanted the viewers to understand the world that he was born into, what was happening. The Portuguese were up in what's Mozambique, and the Dutch had already been down in the Cape. And here in what is currently known as KwaZulu-Natal was this really verdant land, imagine teeming with animals, wildlife. And there were these 40 or 50 small kingdoms or paramouncies, because even the word king was different at the time. And, how were they living? What was at stake for them? What was important? What was the diplomacy between them? So we wanted to build societies that we understood were sophisticated, that had politics, that had medicine, that understood how the land worked, and that had agreements between the different kingdoms. And how did those agreements work around, say, hunting and where cattle could graze, etc. So that by the time we introduced Shaka, we already understood the lay of the land.
And I must say, from a viewer's perspective, I mean, it's definitely not what season 1 was from a storyline perspective. Also, it's definitely not what I was thinking was going to happen, right? Because, I mean, having watched the Henry Cleles, doing that Shaka, and you think to yourself, like, okay, where are we going with this one, right?
Yeah.
And it really was a beautiful and well-narrated story, right?
Thank you.
But now, from some of the highlights, right? I may have the step wrong, but I remember episode 1 having reached something about 2 million viewers on Mzansi Magic.
3.6.
3.6. I mean, even more, right? And for me, especially in today's television times where behaviors have changed, that's a huge feat. What other highlights can you extract from season 1?
I mean, season 1 was just, every minute was a highlight. Can you imagine what an adventure? Because none of this had been done before. Nobody tried to make TV like that. So we didn't have a benchmark that we could, and I just want to touch on why we also started where we did, is we understood, Henry Cleles was a fantastic Shaka. Come on.
Correct.
He was fabulous. How do you introduce an actor to compete? And so partly the decision to go all the way back was to say, let's look at him from a child. Let's understand, let's learn about his mother. Let's learn about King Dingaswayo. Let's learn about the Ndwandwes. And let's bring Shaka into this world as a child. And a little bit, it's like a palate cleanser for the audience, so that you slowly forget about the old Shaka and that you start to fall in love with these characters, so that by the time you meet Shaka as an adult, you're already invested in his story because you've seen the child. And I have to say that the young man who played, the young Shaka was such a fabulous kid. And
I was in love with him.
Oh, no, he's a wonderful, wonderful actor. But so we had many highlights. It was an extremely spiritual set. And I think it's important to talk about that, because I think everybody in the making of that show understood that we were doing something that was important. None of us came to that show saying it's just another TV series. We all understood that what we're trying to do is to bring a really important history to life for future generations, for our kids. That each character was important, even though you might say the Ndwandwes are the antagonists of the piece. Well, no, not really. Not if you're an Ndwandwe. Correct. Zwide was fighting like hell for his own people. You might say that Ntombazi is a witch. Was she? Was she a scientist? Was she just clever in learning how to manipulate fear into a weapon, because you needed a weapon, so people were scared of her. So really trying to, so there were so many experiences, but I'd say one of the highlights for me was definitely the spiritual experience on that set. I could see how it impacted on many of the actors in scenes. We had lots of moments where we had to stop shooting because we knew that the ancestors were with us on that set. And everybody understood that in that moment. So, we would lose 3-4 hours. Very early on in the beginning, we were lucky we had asked Nyosi Mleche, who's been the praise singer for the previous king and this king. He came out onto the set, the location, before we even built the sets. And we asked the ancestors permission. We asked them to bless us. We asked permission. We asked them to travel with us. And we really wanted this to be, we wanted to recognize that the story of theirs that we were telling, we wanted to tell in the best possible way. And we wanted to ask them to help us tell the story. So, and I feel a little bit tearful even when I tell you this, because I remember how it felt standing on that set and just feeling like you're embarking on something that's very deep and very important.
I really wish it's something that, many people could experience who have not been a part of such a, great production. But to that, right, there's obviously a lot of impact that the show has had, off screen. And we talk about, the socioeconomic impact in terms of, job creation, and many productions do talk about this, but I think at this scale, I'm sure it's something else for you, right? Just talk about some of those other initiatives and things that have been extracted from people working on this production.
I mean, firstly, for all of us, it was something new, so we had to learn something new, and how to do period pieces. And we were working in the winter. We had to, because in the summer there's snakes. It's too hot for people to be out in the sun. Your skin is going to get burnt. But it was very hard in the winter because people are wearing very little. How do you keep people warm? Sometimes we'd have 400-500 background extras on set, as well as cast and crew. So we could have 1,000 people on the set on a day. Just how to keep people warm and how to manage those logistics, how to feed everybody and make sure that we've got enough toilets and, so just the experience of those logistics. But with those logistics also came huge employment. I mean, I think on the first season we employed over 8,000 people. On the second season, it's well over 16,000 people. We'll see now. We haven't done a recent calc, but well over 16,000 jobs created. And that's from rural jobs, where we had groups of women in rural parts of KZN hand weaving for us all the rope that was used to tie around the huts, because all the huts were built in an authentic style. Even in the beginning, we had to get thatch, that you've got to get special thatch that's only had one frost, but you've got to wait for the first frost because the first frost helps the thatch to endure. And then we had all these thatchers coming up from KZN. So employment was a big thing. People making pots. We toyed a lot with the decision of, do we get manufacturing and just manufacture it like film sets do? And then we said, no, there's people who we could be employing in small rural communities making pots for us. And so from Limpopo all the way down to KZN, we were collecting. We had trucks going out and collecting and put orders into communities and spears and shields. And so that was a different way of working also, because normally, with a film crew, you just work as quick and you want people that you can manage. So if somebody doesn't deliver, you just replace them with another manufacturer. But on this, we felt like the story is so big. It's not our story. We need to try and involve as many people as we can in telling the story. So there was a lot of those kind of initiatives that happened. And it was great. Even in the casting, I mean, wow, you'd get like 1,000 people arriving at the casting sessions in Durban. And I mean, just like a big shout out to KZN, because there is so much talent. Every time you do a casting there, you just know that you're going to come back with so many amazing new faces.
And now to those, big fans of this production, what can they look forward to? Oh, it's going to be so different in this season.
Season 2 is so exciting. Season 1 was the telling of the boy to man story, what happened. And season 2 now is the man. And we start off really where we landed at the end of season 1, where he returns to KwaZulu to reclaim or to claim his throne. And then it is about exploring him as he builds the Zulu nation, because at that time the Zulus were tiny. There were like 700, 1,000 Zulus. It was a small, relatively inconsequential kingdom. The Mtetwas, the Klabes, the Ndwandwes, the Mabudus, the Mpondos, they were all huge. The Zulus were tiny. And so this season, we see how Shaka goes from this tiny little kingdom of 700 to 1,000 people to the mighty Zulu kingdom that we all know. And that, of course, now there's 20 million Zulu people. But by the end of season 2, you see Shaka has really united either through war or through diplomacy or through people just realizing we better jump on this ship because this guy's, means he's the real deal.
Now, and as someone who's like truly invested in the story of Shaka and the history itself, what are the key lessons that are to be learned from this story?
It's interesting because you think about leadership and people talk about Shaka as a great military leader. But I think that he's often been underestimated because you don't create something so powerful purely through military tactics. He already employed the power of cultural power. And so if you think of all the rituals of dance, of music, of culture in the Zulu context, you understand how he united so many different things because each one of these little kingdoms had their own cultural activities. So, and then diplomacy. So I think one learns from it that leadership is about many things. It's not just one approach. And yeah, I mean, there's just so many lessons to be learned from it around where we come from, the importance of remembering where we come from.
Now, as you know, at MultiChoice, we're all about, enriching people's lives, and that's through, storytelling, that's through investment in the industry itself and people, etc. And as someone who's a huge advocate, for the arts, and you've also kind of like, and I think just watching you from the outside, I think you've also in a way been very intentful in starting people's careers. Is that something for you that is deliberate in bringing out new faces on screen?
Yes, definitely, on screen and off screen. I think that we just have so much talent, and if there's something that I can do to open the door for somebody else to walk through and find their way, then I'll do it. And that's an exciting thing also to watch people grow, is to give somebody an opportunity. You can't do more than that. You can open a door for somebody. You can say yes when somebody phones and says, can I come and intern? And so obviously on shows like Isibaya, on Shaka, all the shows that we've done, we've had many interns and many people who's been their first time, not only coming into the industry, but also upskilling people, saying, okay, you were an assistant grip. We think that you're ready to move into key gripping or, take over as the head of an art department. And so that's very intentional for us, is to keep opening the door for new actors, new crew. But at the same time, you need that balance of experience.
Correct.
And so having really experienced actors together with new actors, it creates like an energy, because the experienced actor also, drives off the energy that the inexperienced actor brings onto set. And it's the same with technicians and behind the scenes, is that you actually need both. Experience isn't the only thing you need, because people come with little experience and they're prepared to take risks and try things that maybe you wouldn't have done, but technology changes. So you learn a lot. I mean, I learn a lot every day that young people come into our space.
Now, I'm going to go off script just for 2 seconds. I know off camera we spoke about the development part of any industry, etc. And you also being an associate member, I understand, of National Film and Video Foundation. Do you believe more is actually being done in terms of, upskilling and developing new talent in this industry?
I think, for example, MultiChoice does a lot. And I think that that's really important. I've been involved with the initiatives here, and I've seen the people that have come out of these initiatives, and lots of them are now filmmakers doing extremely well. Do I think enough is being done? No, there's never enough being done for opportunities for young people. And I think the real problem actually is about money. Because it's one thing to say to somebody, here's an opportunity, or, you can study something, but you've got to have the money to do it. And I think that that's often, for us, we've started at BOM a little bursary now. Every year we try and fund a couple of students, as many as we can afford in that year. And we realize that some of the biggest problems they have really isn't so much about paying for the tuition fees. It's about the stuff that comes with it, where to stay, food, all of those things. So that's why I think that, like, the initiative that MultiChoice has, which is paying these interns enough to be able to, get their transport back and forwards, I think that's really important. And I think we need to be doing more.
And now let's talk more about, like, you've done so much, right? But what is Desiree's legacy? What is the thing that anybody is going to look at you and say, this is what she stood for?
Phew. I hope, I think on the one hand, I hope it is that respect the audience. Because every piece of work, like, it's a privilege to be commissioned or to raise money to make content. It's a privilege to go into people's households every night and entertain. And you've got to be thinking hard about, what am I putting out in the world? What am I putting into Sipho's house tonight? What is his family consuming? And so for me, the fundamental is respect your audience. Know your audience. Listen to what viewers are telling you, not what they say they want to watch, because that's the creative space, but what are viewers telling you about their life? And, so what are you doing that is bringing value into people's lives? I'd like to think that the body of work that we've made has always thought about what value are we bringing in. In the days of User, we understood we were exuberant, we were post-democracy, and we were saying, but hold on a second, let's look at what's happening in our schools and what role can parents play. It's not just the teacher's responsibility. Now, 30 years later, we're saying, okay, maybe we're feeling a bit despondent because things aren't as rainbow as they were, in the beginning. But okay, then let's look back at, where do we come from? Where's the dignity of our past? Let's tell stories that remind people that we come from something great and that we're not defined by where we are today. So I think respect is a big thing. And then the other thing that I think is important for me personally is, I just want to see a lot of young filmmakers out there succeeding, and succeeding because they're making great content. Film and television is the new novel. It's the way we communicate. It's the way we are understanding each other as a society. So that's what I would like my legacy to be, is that there are filmmakers out there that are telling important stories and entertaining people at the same time.
Correct. I mean, I think that's what it's about, right? It's a form of escapism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we want to be entertained. But off script again, when you're not telling beautiful stories, what do you do to just be Desiree?
Well, I have a family of 3 kids. They're all grown up now. So a lot of the time was being involved with my children. I'm quite a loner, actually. So after a shoot, or when I'm very tired, really I look to be alone and just get in touch with myself physically again. Like, because when you're busy working, you're not thinking about how you breathe or how fit you are or just your own health. So as soon as I finish on a big job, I'd like to spend a week or 2 weeks entirely on my own and just go inside and say, okay, how am I doing? Am I healthy? Am I okay? Breathe. I like to swim. So yeah, otherwise I like to spend time with my family.
All right. Mom Des, we're almost at the end of this great conversation. But I mean, before we wrap things up, is there anything that you'd like to, tell to, the young creatives out there, I guess, guys who might not feel like there's hope for them left in this industry. But what would you like to say to those people?
There's so much excitement. You can have a few bad days. Don't be defined by a no. Don't be defined by a bad day. I've had many no's in my life. Even after the big success of Yuzu, there were times there was not a broadcaster that would work with us because they thought we made dangerous TV, whatever. Don't be defined by no, but be prepared to put in the hard work. I think often people forget that the doors open when you are prepared to work hard for them. Keep knocking on them. If you get pushed back, come back again. Look at yourself. Why did I get pushed back? What might be the reason? We had a young actor now on the new Shaka who you'll meet. He plays the character in Ndlele. And he had come for the auditions in season 1 and he hadn't made it. And instead of being, I'm not good enough, he went back to KZN and he really started to work on his body. You'll see when you watch the show. And he came back for the second round of auditions and he made it because we suddenly went, wow, this person's really worked on themselves in their performance and in their look. And it was impossible for us not to cast. So I think I would say that to any young person. Just don't take no, but ask yourself, what might I do differently to get a yes next time? And the other thing I think is just be curious. This industry has got so many things changing all the time. Now AI is coming and we'll go, oh my gosh, is it going to take our jobs? Well, it's going to change our jobs and we're going to use it, but think of it as a tool. Like video suddenly became a tool and film went out, but people still want content. People still want stories and creators have to create them. And somebody still has to dress you and still has to think about the colors and so just adapt. But keep creating. That's what you have to do.
I love how you're so passionate about, that side of, of things. And for me, and I can resonate with it and definitely relate because I think there's so many opportunities, but sometimes people need to be pointed in the right direction for those, and also understanding that you need to build the resilience. Business industry is
it's tough,
cutthroat.
Yeah,
Cutthroat.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy industry, and be prepared for people to be blunt.
Correct,
because the sun is going down.
Mom Des, thank you very much for this conversation. I really, really appreciate your time, and looking forward to Shaka iLembe season 2. I'm sure it's going to be even bigger and better than season 1. So looking forward to it.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely being in.